So let us start with the interview. Now, this chapter is a bit boring for students, but let's just very quickly, summarize. Now, part one of this chapter, you understand, we are going to be talking about the different and diverse perspectives about an interview. See, some people like interviews, some people don't like interviews. The ones who like interviews are journalists, of course, because they're getting the masala. But those who do not like interviews, of course, are people, like celebrities, writers, and all of them. Now, what are the good aspects of an interview, general good aspects of an interview, according to this chapter? So, an interview is considered a source of truth. One, it is considered a form of art. Second, third, according to this chapter, an interview is good because it gives perfect insight and perfect reality of someone's personality. You understand? And it's also considered an excellent medium of communication. Fine. And journalists like Dennis Bryan, all of them, they really like interviews because it gives them a lot of power and influence. Journalists and the interviewer, fine, has a lot of power and influence over an interviewee, fine, who's taking the interview. Now, another thing that you need to understand, the bad aspects. People hate, despise, detest, and dislike interviews. Why and what are the major reasons for that? The major reason why people detest, dislike, hate interviews, because they consider it an unwarranted intrusion into their private life. You understand? It is an encroachment on privacy. They don't like it because they don't want to discuss their personal life in the open. And the other thing is, according to many, fine, an interview has a diminishing effect. Fine, it takes something away from you. Like in primitive cultures, the chapter says, in primitive cultures there was a belief. Fine, what was the belief? That if someone was trying to take a photographic portrait of you, fine, that person was stealing your soul. Fine, so it's almost like this, that people don't like celebrities and the writers, they don't like giving interviews because they feel that interviews have diminishing effect on their personality. They lose a part of themselves. They take something, interviews take something away from them. So very quickly revise, according to many general aspects, many people like an interview because what are the good aspects of an interview? According to journalists and many people, it is considered a source of truth. It is considered an art. It gives perfect insight of someone's personality. It is considered an excellent medium of communication. But many people dislike, detest, hate, all kinds of things. Why don't they like interviews? The reason for that is because they consider an interview as an unwarranted intrusion. Fine, someone is getting into your personal life unnecessarily. And one second, it is also considered that as if it has some diminishing effect on your personality. It takes something away from you. And give example of that, primitive culture. Now, another thing that you need to understand is, in this particular part one of the chapter, we are of course dealing with the opinions of different writers. Fine. And all of these are, who is V.S. Naipaul, who is Lewis Carroll, who is Rudyard Kipling, who is H.G. Wells, who is Saul Bellow. You'll just write that they are prolific writers. They are wonderful writers, nothing else you need to learn. And they have different opinions about interviews. V.S. Naipaul, who is he? He's a prolific writer. He's a wonderful writer. He says that he doesn't like interviews because he feels that interviews wound him. Interviews, he loses a part of himself in an interview. Interviews have an injuring effect on him. They wound him. You understand? Lewis Carroll, the famous writer. Who is Lewis Carroll? A prolific writer. He has written a wonderful and a very famous, book. Of course, Alice in the Wonderland. And he had a horror of interviewer. He used to keep interviewers away. He didn't like, fine, giving interviews. And because the reason for that is, he felt that after an interview he will be lionized. He will be projected larger than life. Just like जो है नहीं वो दिखा देंगे बढ़ा चढ़ाकर. You understand? So he had the fear of being lionized. He did not want to be shown and projected. You understand? as larger than life. One thing. Another person is Rudyard Kipling. This is an important question. Rudyard Kipling, you understand, Rudyard Kipling used to call, interview and something immoral, something like a crime, fine, and it is a punishable offense according to him. It is considered vile and cowardly, fine. So Rudyard Kipling, who is Rudyard Kipling? A prolific writer. He used to feel that giving interviews, taking interviews, all of this was immoral, all of this was a crime, it was an assault, fine. It was vile means negative, it was cowardly, मतलब बुजदिल है जो interviews ले रहा है या interviews दे रहा है, etc. Why does he feel so कि interviews लेना is, it's cowardly, is a cowardly act? According to him, the interviewer is actually taking advantage of the interviewee's weaknesses. So therefore, it is cowardly to take an interview, and it is also vile and immoral to be part of an interview, answering questions in an interview. So he does not like. And who tells us this thing that he did not like, giving interviews? His wife, Caroline, wrote in her diary on 14 October 1892 that some reporters gathered around them and Rudyard Kipling से पूछा कि interviews क्यों नहीं देते हो? So Rudyard Kipling then says that it is immoral, it is crime, it is criminal to be part of an interview. But his opinion was slightly contradictory. Why? Because he himself interviewed whom? After he gave such a statement that it's a crime, it's immoral and all of that, and then he himself interviewed whom? Mark Twain, fine. And he interviewed Mark Twain, and first he was saying it is bad, it is this and that. So contradictory view. Similarly, H.G. Wells. Who is H.G. Wells? Famous writer of The Invisible Man. आएगा question तो बस लिख देना, H.G. Wells is a prolific writer. Who is this? Who is this? Who is this? Who is this? All of these are prolific writers. Now you need to understand H.G. Wells in 1894, fine, said that being part of an interview was like an ordeal. It was a struggle. It was an ordeal. It was great difficulty for him to be part of an interview. But 40 years later, fine, after giving the statement कि interview में बैठना is a struggle, it's an ordeal, 40 years later, he himself interviewed Joseph Stalin. So both Rudyard Kipling and H.G. Wells had contradictory opinions. They said that it was, an ordeal. One said it was a crime to be part of an interview. And they themselves interviewed whom? One interviewed Mark Twain and one interviewed Joseph Stalin. So this was something contradictory. Now Saul Bellow, according to him, being part of an interview was a suffocating experience. He says being part of an interview or interviews are like thumbprints on his windpipe. They were like thumbprints on his windpipe. He felt stifled and suffocated when he was in an interview. To learn it very quickly, I have got this acronym made. You can learn VLRHS. Fine. VLRHS. V.S. Naipaul. What was his opinion? Lewis Carroll. What was his opinion? Rudyard Kipling. His opinion. H.G. Wells and Saul Bellow. This is important. Fine. So he used to feel suffocated. Part 1 may we have diverse perspectives. Some people like Dennis Bryan, the journalist. He's a very famous journalist. He likes interview, but most of the celebrities and writers, they don't like interviews because of their own reasons and some general negative points about an interview. Now, part 2 is actually an example of an interview. Part 2 is actually an example of an interview. Who is the interviewer here? The interviewer is a reporter from The Hindu. This newspaper is The Hindu. And the name of the interviewer, the one who's taking interview, Mukund Padmanabhan. You understand? And the one who's giving interview is Umberto Eco. You understand? So Umberto Eco was actually the professor at the University of Bologna in Italy. You understand? And he was actually a well-known scholar on semiotics. Semiotics is the study of signs. कि इसका मतलब क्या है, इसका मतलब क्या है, all of that. So, you need to understand that he was actually a professor at the University of Bologna, Italy. He was a scholar on semiotics and he had written wide-ranging literature. He had written articles, newspaper articles, essays, children's fiction, children's books, all of that. And his most famous novel was, which which was sold like hotcakes, was The Name of the Rose. It was a very famous novel. Now, when an interview begins, what kind of an interview it is? Of course, question and answer. All kinds of interviews. All the interviews are like this. And the first question that is put up by Padmanabhan to this person was, the same question was one day put up by David Lodge. David Lodge was an English novelist. The same question is put up by Mukund Padmanabhan. He asks, he was really confused how a single person was able to do so many things at the same time. He's writing novels also, he's writing academic essays also, he's writing newspaper articles also. How can a single person do so many things? So the answer that, of course, Umberto Eco gives, Eco says that, he accepts that he writes many things, but he says, I'm not writing different things. All my works revolve around the same bunch of philosophical ideas. Many of my works, or most of my works, are only around the ideas of peace and non-violence. So I'm writing many things, but I'm writing similar things. And he also mentions that he uses, he makes wonderful use of his time, he mentions. And he says that, he writes in the interstices, he writes in the empty spaces of his life. For example, I've called you to my apartment. You are coming, you are in the elevator, I'm waiting for you. That is an empty space. I'm not gonna just sit and wait for you. I will write an article in that time period. The moment you reach, your elevator reaches my apartment, I will end up writing an article. So this is what he says. Now the second question that is put up to him is usually academic work, whether it is your, let's say social science textbook, or whether it's your physics textbook, or whether it's your maths textbook, accounts textbook, everything is so dull and drab. Everything is so dull and drab. Everything is written in a very boring style. So just conclusions have been written, formulae have been written, all of that. So you need to understand that this scholar, Umberto Eco, he has a personal touch to his writing. He has a playful touch. You understand? Just like in, old science textbooks, I don't know whether you remember, NCRT old science textbook, there was Bhujo, Paheli, and very interactive they were. You understand? So he used to have a very playful touch, and it was not very boring the way he used to write. It was very, it had a personal touch to it. And the question that is put up to him is it something that he forces, does he force himself to write that way, or is it something that comes to him very naturally? This is the question that is put up to him. And now he narrates the story of his doctoral dissertation. He says, back when I was writing my, thesis, usually what do people do? They just jump onto the conclusion. They just write the final result. He says that I did not come to the conclusion right away. I used to show all the steps. I used to show all the errors and trials and everything. And I used to narrate everything in a very, in a kind of a story style. You understand? So he had a narrative style of writing, and his professor liked it so much that he got his thesis, that he got his dissertation published as a book, and he felt motivated and started writing in that manner only. He started writing novels very late in life. Fine. One of his friends wanted to write novels, but he never got the chance, and he couldn't. So now the third question that is put up to him is, he has written, he's a university professor. He has written 40 articles, he has written 40 essays, or you can say scholarly works, but only 5 novels. But still people recognize him more like a novelist and not a scholar. So he says, see, I don't attend all these meetings of pen clubs and writers. I don't attend these, Kavi Sammelan and all of that. I am a scholar. I am a professor. I attend academic conferences and not these pen clubs of writers. So I don't want people to recognize me as a novelist, because I have written more essays and more scholarly essays than novels. But because novels are more famous and more in trend and more people read, who reads articles, who reads research, research papers? No one does that. So he says, because novels are more in trend, therefore people know me as a novelist, because they read that only. Now the next question that is put up to him is the secret of his what is it, the most famous novel that he has written, The Name of the Rose. Now, Mukund Padmanabhan, the reporter, he says that this novel was actually a detective story. This novel was actually a detective story, and it, also had the elements of metaphysics, theology, medieval history, everything. And it was a very kind of a difficult, or you can say a serious kind of a novel, but still it was a super hit. What is the reason behind that? So, Umberto Eco, he says that, this also left journalists puzzled. Usually people, and especially journalists, feel that people like trash. People only like easy novels. They can't read difficult novels. But then he explains with an example. He says, I go back home, I come back from work 9 p.m. I watch light television programs like Miami Vice and Emergency Room. I've, these light comedy shows and all of that, but I can't watch it all day. So similarly, people like light, easy, breezy novels, but they can't just read easy, breezy novels all day, all year. So they also want some, serious novels sometimes at times here. So therefore, this was the reason why his novel, according to him, became super hit. The last question that was put up to him was whether the success of his novel was lying in the fact that the novel dealt with a period from medieval history, because history में भी कुछ लोग interested होते हैं, they like it. So was it because the story also dealt with medieval history? Was this the reason why his novel became quite successful? So now this person Umberto Eco, he mentions that even his publisher, she was not even confident that his novel, this kind of a difficult novel, will be will be sold like hotcakes. But and he had she had only given advance for 3,000 copies. She was also not sure, but the novel, 10 million copies were sold of this novel. So he himself couldn't answer this question properly, and he says why this novel became a super hit is a mystery to me as well. So this brings us to the end of the interview. Thank you.